The courtroom fell into an eerie silence as the defense attorney finished his argument, and every single pair of eyes turned to the judge. He sat at the bench with the air of a man who had already won his posture straight, his expression composed, his eyes cold and calculating. He was a towering figure in the legal world, admired by many, feared by others. A lifetime of power, respect, and influence had placed him beyond reproach in the eyes of most. But today, the judge was not in control of the room. The courtroom buzzed with tension, the whispers of the audience becoming drowned by the sheer magnitude of the case. The man who had spent his life doling out justice was now the one in the defendant's seat, accused of being the very thing he had so often condemned, a murderer. The charges against him were damning, though circumstantial. His wife, a beloved figure in their small community, had died in what was initially believed to be a tragic accident. But the details didn't quite add up. The police had found no signs of foul play at first, but a deeper investigation revealed disturbing inconsistencies in the judge's alibi and traces of a deliberate cover-up that had gone unnoticed for years. The public, however, was divided some. Believed the judge was a man of integrity. Others saw the cracks in his perfect facade. The defense attorney's closing words echoed in the room. "My client has been a pillar of justice in this community for decades. He is a man of honor, integrity, and the highest moral standards. To suggest that he could be capable of such an act is an insult to all he has accomplished. But the truth, as it always does, has a way of slipping through the cracks." As the jury filed out to deliberate, the prosecutor rose to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard the evidence. Now I ask you to consider one simple truth. Justice is not about power, wealth, or influence. It's about truth. And the truth is that this man, no matter his position, is guilty of murder." At that moment, a figure in the back of the courtroom caught everyone's eye. It was a young girl, no older than 15, sitting alone in the gallery. Her clothes were simple, but there was something about her, something unsettling. She was not listed as a witness, and her presence there was unremarkable, at least on the surface. She had kept to herself the entire trial, sitting quietly in the shadows, her face partially obscured by her long brown hair. Her name was Clara, and she had been following the trial from the very beginning. Her mother had been the judge's wife, and her sudden death had left Clara with more questions than answers. It was a case she had always struggled to understand. How could her mother, a woman so full of life and promise, die so mysteriously, and why had everyone just accepted the accident as the final answer? The air in the courtroom grew thick with anticipation as Clara stood up slowly, her knees shaking but her voice unwavering. The eyes of the room followed her as she made her way to the front of the gallery, her hand gripping the railing for support. The judge, sitting in his chair with his hands folded, turned to look at her with an expression of feigned indifference. But there was something that passed in his eyes. Something like fear. "Excuse me, miss," the prosecutor said, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. "Do you have something to add?" Clara didn't respond right away. She simply stared at the judge, her gaze fierce, unwavering. Then, in a voice that made every person in the room stop breathing, she said, "You're the killer." The words hit like a thunderclap in a quiet storm, sending shockwaves through the room. The judge's eyes widened for a split second, but his face quickly regained its composure. The jury looked around at each other, unsure of what to make of this sudden outburst. The defense lawyer stood up in alarm, his face flushed with a mix of confusion and anger. The audience whispered, some shocked, others intrigued. The judge's lips barely moved, but the words that came out were chilling. "That's enough, young lady. You will not speak like that in my courtroom." Clara didn't flinch. She wasn't afraid. This wasn't some outburst of youthful recklessness, it was a statement she had carried with her for years. And now, for the first time, she was putting it into words. "You're the killer," she repeated louder this time. "You killed my mother." Gasps echoed around the room. Clara's words shattered the tension like a glass window breaking on a still morning. She stood there, in front of the very man accused of the crime, and pointed directly at him. The courtroom froze. Everyone could feel it, the weight of the accusation, the weight of truth about to be revealed. The judge's hand twitched. His eyes darted to his lawyer, who seemed as lost for words as the rest of them. The defense attorney took a step toward Clara, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're a child. You have no idea what you're saying." Clara didn't back down. "I know exactly what I'm saying. You thought I didn't know, but I do." The judge's confident smile faded, replaced by a cold fury. "Leave this courtroom now, before I have you removed." But Clara was far from finished. She wasn't going anywhere. The prosecutor, who had been stunned into silence, finally spoke. "Miss, I think we need to hear more. Can you tell us what you mean?" Clara's eyes never left the judge as she began to speak. "My mother was afraid of him. She was afraid for years. She wrote about it in her journal. I found it. She said he was planning something. She thought she was going to die. And then she did." Her voice wavered but grew stronger with each word. She wasn't just a victim of an accident. He killed her. He's been covering it up ever since. A murmur spread through the crowd as Clara revealed that the judge's wife had been trying to escape her marriage, trying to expose the truth about the man she had once trusted. And now Clara was going to finish what her mother had started. The room was paralyzed, caught in the web of Clara's words. Every person in that courtroom, from the jury to the media to the judge himself, was left in stunned disbelief. Clara had thrown down the gauntlet, and no one knew what would happen next. The judge, once an untouchable figure, was now the one in the hot seat, and the truth was coming faster than he could hide. But it wasn't just an accusation. Clara had the proof, and the battle for justice had just begun. The courtroom was in chaos. Clara's explosive accusation had left everyone stunned, but as the noise of the crowd died down, there was one undeniable truth. Something was off, and the judge could no longer hide behind his reputation. His smug, authoritative demeanor was gone, replaced by a flicker of panic in his eyes that didn't escape Clara's notice. She had never intended for things to escalate this way, but her heart had been aching with a need for justice. The truth, buried beneath layers of deception, was finally coming to the surface. And now, she was ready to uncover the whole damn thing. After the court adjourned for a break, Clara walked out of the building, her mind racing. The confrontation in the courtroom had been just the beginning, but it had also made her realize how far-reaching the web of lies was. The judge, a man everyone trusted, had murdered her mother, and he had done it to protect himself, to keep his control over everything that mattered. But Clara wasn't just a child anymore. She was a young woman determined to uncover the truth her mother had tried to reveal before she died. She didn't go home. Instead, Clara made her way to an old, dusty storage room in the back of her late mother's house. It had always been off-limits when she was younger, a place filled with things that belonged to a past she had never fully understood. But now, Clara knew it held the key to everything. Her mother's private life, the life she had hidden from Clara for so long, was stored away in boxes that never saw the light of day. Clara's hands trembled as she opened the first box, the smell of old paper and leather filling her nostrils. Inside, she found a stack of journals, worn and frayed with age. Her mother had written religiously page after page of thoughts, memories, fears. Clara flipped through them, her heart racing with every entry, until she found the one she'd been hoping for. The journal from the year before her mother's death. The words on the page were chilling. "I feel like I'm being watched. Every day, he gets closer to the truth. I don't know if I can keep hiding it anymore. But if I tell anyone, it'll be too late." Clara's chest tightened as she read the words over and over again. Her mother had known something was wrong long before she died. The judge, her husband, wasn't just a man who had an affair or made some terrible decisions. He was someone capable of far worse. Clara continued reading, her eyes scanning the journal for any other hidden revelations. There was mention of financial records, strange meetings, and even a mention of someone who had gone missing shortly after her mother's death. It was all connected, but it wasn't clear how yet. Clara needed to dig deeper. She couldn't do it alone. As she closed the journal, she knew exactly who she had to call. Someone who had seen behind the closed doors of the judge's life. Someone who had questioned everything when the police had failed to do their job. She needed Detective Rose. Detective Rose had once been part of the original investigation into her mother's death, but she had been dismissed under mysterious circumstances. Rumor had it that Rose had gotten too close to the truth, so close that it threatened powerful people. But Clara knew Rose was the one person who could help her now. The call was brief, but the detective's voice was calm and assuring. "I'll meet you. There are things I should have told you a long time ago." When Clara arrived at the detective's office, Rose was waiting for her. The older woman in her late 40s looked worn down, the weight of too many unsolved cases pressing on her. But there was fire in her eyes when she looked at Clara. "I never should have let you go through this alone," Rose said, her voice low. "But there are things even I didn't know at the time. Things I only began to piece together after your mother died." The detective motioned for Clara to sit down. She pulled a folder from her desk and opened it. Inside were old case files, documents that had been hidden, ignored, or covered up. Clara's eyes widened as Rose flipped through the papers. There were records of phone calls, witnesses who had never testified, and financial documents that made no sense. It was more than just a murder, Clara, Rose continued. Your mother wasn't just some woman in a bad marriage. She had uncovered something much bigger than we realized. Something involving your father, the judge, and his wealth. He was being blackmailed by someone powerful, but your mother wouldn't back down. She started to dig, and that's when she became a target. Clara sat back, her mind reeling. You're saying he wasn't just controlling her? He was afraid she was going to expose something he had done? Rose nodded. Exactly. The night your mother died, there was a meeting between her and a man we never identified. She had called an attorney, but the message was never delivered. I think she was planning to go public with everything. Clara's hands clenched into fists. She couldn't understand it. Her mother had been strong, independent. She had trusted people, trusted her own husband. How could she have been so blind to the evil right under her nose? Then, Rose added, there's this. She handed Clara a piece of paper, a letter written in her mother's handwriting. It was addressed to a lawyer of the few who had refused to work for the judge. The letter read, I know what he did. I know what he's hiding. If anything happens to me, I want you to take this to the police. He is guilty. He will never stop until he has everything. Please help me. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. Her mother had known she was in danger, but she hadn't just been afraid of the judges. She had known that his crimes were far-reaching, and there were others involved in his schemes. I'll help you get justice, Rose said, her voice firm. We'll expose him, but you need to be prepared. What we're dealing with is bigger than you think. Clara left the detective's office that day with a burning determination. There was no going back now. Her mother had been right. The judge wasn't just a murderer, was a part of something far darker, something that spanned far beyond their family. She had the proof. She had the journal, the letters, the documents. But the hardest part was still ahead of her. She needed to bring it all to court. And she needed to make sure no one else would be silenced, no matter how powerful the enemy was. As Clara walked through the rain-soaked streets, her mind was focused on one thing: justice. And she wouldn't stop until she had exposed the truth her mother had fought for, the truth that would bring down the man who had once been untouchable. The days following Clara's meeting with Detective Rose were a whirlwind of fear and resolve. Clara had never felt more determined in her life, yet every step forward seemed to lead her deeper into a web of danger and lies. The closer she got to the truth, the more people she realized were involved, some willing to protect the judge at all costs, others who had become too entangled in his machinations to break free. Clara knew she had to act fast. The evidence she had gathered, the journals, the letters, the financial documents, was powerful, but it was still only pieces of a puzzle that needed to be put together. The judge's reputation was impeccable, and the system that had protected him for decades would not crumble easily. She needed leverage, something to shatter the judge's defenses once and for all. But it wasn't just about exposing him anymore. Clara had begun to understand the far-reaching consequences of his actions. The judge had not only killed her mother, had used his power to ruin countless lives, including the lives of those who had helped him build his empire of control and corruption. If he got away with this, there would be more victims. More innocent people would suffer. Clara had no intention of letting that happen. That night, Clara sat at her desk, her eyes scanning the pages of her mother's journal again. The words that had once seemed like clues were now starting to take shape in her mind. She read one passage over and over, as if the words themselves were calling out to her. I know the man who's been blackmailing him. He's dangerous, but I have to get the truth out. The name her mother had written down wasn't one Clara recognized, but the note sent a chill down her spine. Her mother had known who the judge's enemy was, who had been manipulating the judge from the shadows. The name was a lead, and it was the key to understanding the full extent of the conspiracy that had led to her mother's murder. Clara's hand shook as she picked up the phone. There was one place she hadn't checked yet, the one place where she was sure she would find the answers to the questions that still haunted her. She dialed the number with trembling fingers. It rang once, twice. Then a voice on the other end answered. Yes, Miss Clara? Clara recognized the voice immediately. It was Thomas, the judge's former assistant, a man who had worked for him for years and was one of the few people who might have known more than he had ever let on. But why had he agreed to speak to her? Why had he answered the call? Thomas, I need your help, Clara said, her voice steady but urgent. You knew my mother, and you worked closely with my father. I need to know everything. You can't stay silent anymore. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, finally, he spoke. I've been waiting for you to call. Clara's heart raced. What do you mean? You're right, he said quietly. There's a lot more going on than you know, but you don't know who you're up against. The people your father is involved with, they will stop at nothing to protect themselves. I'm talking about people who have more power than you can imagine." Clara felt a cold rush of fear, but she pushed it down. "I don't care about their power. I just want the truth. You owe it to my mother to tell me what you know." Thomas sighed. "All right, meet me at the old pier tomorrow night. I'll tell you everything, but you have to be careful. The judge, he's got eyes everywhere." Clara's pulse quickened. She had no choice but to trust him. Tomorrow night, she would finally get the answers she had been chasing. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, Clara would have everything she needed to destroy the judge's carefully constructed life. The next evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara made her way to the pier. The air was thick with the smell of salt water, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against the docks. She felt a mix of dread and anticipation in her chest. She wasn't sure what Thomas would reveal, but she knew that meeting him here meant things were about to get far more dangerous. When she arrived, she saw him standing by the edge of the pier, his hands stuffed in his coat pockets. He looked like a man who had carried a heavy burden for far too long. "You came," Thomas said, his eyes flicking nervously around. "Good. I wasn't sure you would. Tell me everything," Clara demanded, her voice unwavering. "I'm not leaving until I know the truth." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right. Your mother was right about everything. The judge isn't just guilty of murder. He's been involved in a much larger operation: money laundering, bribery, blackmail. He's been using the power of the court system to control everything around him. The people he's been working with are dangerous, and they're not going to let you destroy him without a fight." Clara's heart sank. She had suspected that the judge's crimes went deeper than she had realized, but hearing it confirmed by someone so close to him hit her hard. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Who is he working with?" Thomas paused, taking a deep breath. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, but you have to understand, Clarath Judge's reach goes far beyond this town. The man who's been blackmailing him, it's not just one person. It's a group, a syndicate, and they've been pulling the strings for years. Your father is just a puppet, and now they've got you in their sights." Clara recoiled, her stomach churning. "But what about my mother? Why did they kill her?" "Because she was going to expose them. She was a threat to everything they had worked for," Thomas said. "She knew too much, and they couldn't let her live." A cold rage washed over Clara. "Then I'm going to expose them. Every last one of them." Thomas shook his head. "You can't. Not alone. You're too young, Clara. You don't have the resources. They'll destroy you before you can even get started." Clara's eyes narrowed, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll find a way. I don't care how dangerous they are. I'm not going to let them get away with this." The weight of the information she had just received settled heavily on Clara's shoulders. She was no longer just seeking justice for her mother's death. Now, she was up against a shadowy syndicate that had infiltrated every level of society. If she wanted to bring them down, she would need allies, resources, and a plan, something more than just anger and determination. But one thing was clear. This was no longer about just one man's guilt. This was about exposing a hidden world of power, corruption, and deception. And Clara was the only one who had the courage to tear it all down. Clara's breath came in shallow gasps as she walked away from the pier. The night had turned colder, and the weight of Thomas's words pressed heavily on her chest. She had thought the judge was the worst of it, the murderer, the tyrant. But now she knew that the web he had woven stretched far beyond what she could have ever imagined. And it wasn't just his life at risk, it was hers as well. As Clara made her way home, her mind spun with possibilities. Thomas had warned her of the dangers she faced. He had even told her she was fighting a battle she couldn't win alone. But Clara wasn't like other people. She didn't give up, not when it mattered most. The truth about her mother's death was out there, and she would find it no matter the cost. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and quiet desperation. Clara knew that the judge would stop at nothing to keep his secrets buried. His power ran deep, far beyond the local courthouse. He was part of a network that reached across the country, a network filled with people who would do anything to protect their interests. But Clara had a weapon now: knowledge. She had her mother's journal, the letters, the financial records, saying the most important of all, the names Thomas had given her. She had a lead, and it was time to follow it. One late evening, Clara visited the local library. It was the one place she knew she could search in relative privacy. She had done her homework, poring over the names and leads Thomas had provided. There was one individual in particular she knew she needed to track down: Marcus Gray, a prominent businessman with ties to the judge's syndicate. The man was said to have a hand in several illegal activities, and he was rumored to be the one pulling the strings when it came to the judge's financial dealings. The librarian was kind, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She quickly skimmed through the local archives, finding old articles and interviews about Marcus Gray. The more she read, the more she realized how dangerous he was. He had built an empire through blackmail, fraud, and extortion, and he had always managed to stay one step ahead of the law. But there was one thing Clara now knew for certain: Marcus Gray was the key to bringing down the entire network. As Clara gathered her research, she found a phone number listed in a piece of old investigative journalism. It was a number she hadn't expected to see, a number connected to a former reporter who had written an expose on Marcus Gray years ago. The reporter had disappeared shortly after the article was published, but his story remained. His name was Ethan Harper. Clara's hands trembled as she copied the number down, making a vow to herself. This was her final chance to expose the truth. She would find Ethan Harper, she would make him tell his story, and in doing so, she would bring down the people who had destroyed her life. The next morning, Clara made the call. Her heart pounded in her chest as the phone rang. She had no idea what kind of person Ethan Harper was, or if he would even remember the article he'd written all those years ago. But she had to try. For her mother. For the truth. Hello? The voice on the other end was rough, like it had been unused for years. Mr. Harper? Clara asked, trying to keep her voice steady. My name is Clara. I need your help. You wrote an article about Marcus Gray years ago, didn't you? I need to know everything you know. There was a long pause. For a moment, Clara thought the call had dropped, but then Harper spoke again, his voice much softer now. You're in deeper than you think, he said. If you're asking about Marcus, you need to understand something. The man you're after, the one who you think is behind your mother's death, he's just a puppet. Gray pulls the strings. The judge, he's a pawn in a much bigger game. And if you want the truth, you're going to have to dig much deeper. But be warned, there are people who will stop at nothing to keep this quiet. Clara's heart skipped a beat. How do I find him? How do I get to Marcus Gray? Harper's voice dropped even lower, filled with caution. Gray's untouchable. But there's one way in. He's been laundering money through a shell corporation. If you can find the records, the bank accounts, the deals, if you can expose them, then you'll have him. But it won't be easy. People have died trying to do it before. Clara took a deep breath. I don't care about the danger. I need to do this. For my mother, for the truth. All right, Harper said. I'll help you. But you need to meet me. I'll give you the files. But you have to be quick. It's too dangerous to leave a paper trail. Meet me tonight. I'll tell you where. Clara felt like she was walking in a fog, every step more uncertain than the last. She knew this was her final opportunity to get the evidence she needed. But the closer she got to Marcus Gray, the more dangerous things would become. She couldn't back out now, not when the truth was within her reach. That night, Clara arrived at the meeting point, an old, decrepit diner on the outskirts of town. It had long since lost its shine, and only a few people sat in the dimly lit booths. Clara's eyes scanned the room looking for any sign of Harper. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching her nerves tighter. Finally, the door swung open, and a man in a dark coat stepped inside. His eyes darted around before he spotted Clara. She recognized him immediately. It was Ethan Harper. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed with years of hiding from his past. But when he saw Clara, there was a flicker of recognition. Clara, he said, his voice low. You're not like the others. You're not afraid. Clara said nothing, her gaze fixed on him. Harper slid into the booth opposite her and placed a folder on the table. These are the files you need, he said. It's everything I've got on Marcus Gray, on the judge, on the syndicate. But once you look at this, there's no going back. They'll be coming for you. Clara didn't hesitate. She opened the folder, her heart pounding as she flipped through the pages. The information inside was damning bank accounts, coded messages, and links to government officials who had been bought and paid for. It was everything she needed to destroy Marcus Gray and bring down the entire operation. But it was also far more dangerous than she had imagined. Thank you, Clara whispered. I won't let this be in vain. Harper's face hardened. Just be careful. If you want to make a real difference, you'll have to go public. You can't do this alone, but trust no one, not even the people you think you can count on. Clara left the diner with the folder clutched tightly in her hands. Her path was clear now, but the road ahead was treacherous. She had the evidence she needed to expose the truth about her father, the judge, and the powerful syndicate that had been pulling their strings. But exposing them wouldn't be easy. In fact, it would be the hardest thing she had ever done. Clara wasn't scared though. She had nothing left to lose. And now, for the first time in years, she felt like she had everything to fight for. Clara felt the weight of the folder in her hands, the pages of truth and betrayal crinkling under her grip. The evidence she had gathered was irrefutable. Marcus Gray's empire was built on corruption, murder, and manipulation, with the judge at the heart of it all. The truth was in her hands. Now all she had to do was expose it to the world. But exposing the truth came at a cost. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous the game became. Every ally she thought she could trust was shrouded in doubt, and the people who had once helped her now appeared to have been under the judge's thumb for years. There was no way to know who might turn against her next, no way to be certain of her own safety. Still, Clara didn't hesitate. She couldn't. Not when everything she loved had been destroyed by the lies they'd told. Not when her mother's life had been sacrificed for the very secrets she was about to reveal. The truth was the only thing that mattered now. It was time. Clara knew she had to go public, to bring everything to light. She contacted a trusted reporter from a major news outlet, someone who could take her story to the world without fear of retaliation. This was her one shot to expose everything. She couldn't afford to mess it up. The plan was set. She would meet the reporter at a secluded location where they would go through the evidence. Once the world knew the truth about Marcus Gray, the judge, and the syndicate, there would be no turning back. The people behind it all would come for her. Of that Clara was certain. But she was done hiding. As Clara prepared to leave for the meeting, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Everything had led to this moment. She was about to break the chains of fear that had held her back for so long. But as she reached the front door of her apartment, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Clara hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "Clara, it's Thomas," came the voice on the other end. "Listen to me. You can't go through with this. You're not ready." Clara's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about? I have everything I need. The world will know the truth." "No," Thomas interrupted. "You don't understand. They know what you're planning. The syndicate. They've been watching you. The reporter you're meeting isn't safe. They've already got to him. I'm telling you, don't go. You're walking straight into a trap." Clara's blood ran cold. "What do you mean? How do you know?" "I can't explain right now. Just trust me. Don't go to the meeting. They're going to kill you if you do." Clara's mind raced. The reporter. The trap. She felt the walls closing in around her. Thomas's voice was urgent, but Clara couldn't make sense of it. She had to go. This was her only chance. But as she stood there, torn between her burning need for justice and the warning Thomas had given her, a realization hit her like a freight train. Thomas wasn't just trying to protect her. He was trying to keep her from uncovering something even bigger. Something he hadn't told her. "I can't back down now," Clara said, her voice unwavering. "I have to go. You've already done enough." "Clara," Thomas pleaded. "Don't be a fool. You'll be dead before you even get there." But it was too late. Clara had made up her mind. The truth would come to light no matter the cost. Clara arrived at the meeting spot, a small cafe in a quiet corner of the city. Her hands were steady as she pushed open the door, but her heart raced. The place was empty except for a single man sitting at the back booth. He was watching her intently. Clara approached cautiously. "Are you Ethan Harper?" The man nodded. "Yes, I've been expecting you. Let's get to work." She slid into the seat across from him, the folder of evidence between them. Ethan's eyes were dark, filled with the weight of secrets he had kept for far too long. But before they could begin, the door opened behind Clara, and a chill ran through her. She turned to see two figures step inside, their faces hidden in shadow. It was as if the world had suddenly gone still, frozen in time. "Clara, don't do this," one of them said, his voice cold and familiar. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. It was Thomas. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood none other than Marcus Gray, the man she had spent weeks tracking down, the man who had killed her mother. "Thomas?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" "You shouldn't have come, Clara," Thomas said, his face betraying nothing. "I tried to warn you, but I see now you're too far gone. It's over." Clara's mind whirled in disbelief. You've been helping them this whole time?" Thomas stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You should have listened. They'll never let you get away with this. The syndicate always wins. The truth is too dangerous for someone like you." Clara's heart pounded. Her Her worst fears were coming true. She had trusted the wrong people. The same people who had led her to the edge of the truth were now turning against her. And then the final blow came. Marcus Gray spoke. "You're nothing but a little girl playing in a game much bigger than you, Clara. Your mother's death? I was just a small part of a bigger plan. You never had a chance." Clara felt her breath hitch. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. They had manipulated her from the start, using her to get what they wanted. But she couldn't stop now. She couldn't let them win. "Maybe I'm just a little girl," Clara said, her voice steady despite the terror gripping her chest. "But I'll burn everything to the ground if it means exposing you for what you really are." With that, Clara reached into her bag and pulled out the final piece of the puzzle, her phone. With a single press of a button, the footage she had recorded of their conversation, the evidence of their crimes, was sent to the reporter she had been working with. It was over. There was no turning back now. The look on Marcus Gray's face twisted into one of fury. "You think you've won? You think the world will believe you?" he sneered. "You're just a dead girl walking." Clara stood up, her gaze never leaving his. "Number, I'm the one who makes sure the world knows, and you're the one who'll fall." Moments later, the door crashed open, and the sound of sirens filled the cafe. The police had arrived just in time. The final confrontation was swift. Marcus Gray and his associates were arrested, the damning evidence now impossible to ignore. Clara had done it. She had brought the truth to the world, no matter the personal cost. But as she stood outside the cafe, her heart still racing from the final confrontation, she couldn't shake the feeling that the game was far from over. There were still people out there who would try to bury the truth, who would stop at nothing to protect the lies. And as Clara watched the flashing lights in the distance, she knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for justice would never be over, not as long as there were people like Marcus Gray hiding in the shadows. But Clara wasn't afraid anymore. She had uncovered the truth, and she would keep fighting to make sure the world would never forget what they had tried to bury. If you were stunned by Clara's relentless pursuit of justice and the shocking betrayal she faced, make sure to like and drop a comment with your thoughts on this twist-filled journey. Clara's fight against corruption isn't over. What do you think will happen next? Subscribe for more heart-pounding tales of truth, revenge, and betrayal. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated on future stories. Your support means everything, and together we'll uncover more secrets and shocking revelations. Thank you for following Clara's story. This is just the beginning of her battle.